Hi, I'm Beth Neville, and I'm a member of the 350th Anniversary Committee for the Town of Milton. That means that the Town of Milton is 350 years old, and that is really a cause for celebration. As soon as I found out that I was going to be appointed to the committee, I decided that I wanted to make a blue commemorative plate. And there's several reasons for that. First of all, I'm an artist, and I've designed a lot of things in my lifetime. I've designed book covers and a fence and a house and clothes and done a lot of artwork. So it's a natural thing for me to be interested in some kind of a really challenging creative project. Also, when I graduated from college and went to Smith College, my mother commissioned a local artist, who was also my art teacher, to make a commemorative plate for my graduation. And it's been one of my treasured things that I've owned ever since. And this is a very simple one plate performance here. She drew on the plate, she put my name on it, and there is only one in existence. The blue plate tradition goes back a long way. This plate is well over 150 years old, and it's the kind of plate that I loved growing up. It's done in Holland, and it's called an Orient design. The blue is pale. There's an image in the middle surrounded by floral decoration. So I've always enjoyed these blue plates, and I definitely wanted to make one. Now, part of the problem with making a blue plate is the design. But before I get into that, I want to tell you why I wanted to make a video. First of all, I want to document the fact that I actually made this blue plate by drawing by hand. It's remarkable. When I show people the plate, a lot of people think that it was done by a computer. No, it was not done by a computer. It was done with a pen, by my personal drawing. So I want to document that it is hand-drawn, and I'm going to try to show you how I went through that process. The second idea is, if you want to design a plate yourself, you could use my technique. I'd be happy to have you follow through with my ideas and suggestions for how to design a commemorative plate for your town or your organization. The last thing is that I want this video to be part of the legacy for our 350th anniversary. And also, if you want to buy a plate, the proceeds will go toward our legacy gift in Milton. So in designing a plate, there are some problems that come up. I'm going to show you a couple of plates to show you just briefly how difficult it is to design a plate. This Longfellow plate represents a lot of problems that we find. If you look at the buildings, they're sort of, this lighthouse image is tipped. Poor Longfellow is sort of going around the plate in an odd fashion. So I find these images all kind of tipped, not a happy solution design-wise. This heavily cracked plate from St. Louis, my husband is from St. Louis, has the same kinds of problems. The buildings tend to be tipped, and worse yet, because the plate has a big bevel in it, the buildings kind of tip. I call this the jelly bean plate because everything is kind of isolated in a jelly bean. Certainly not my favorite design. The Dorchester plate is a better design in terms of the way the pattern that it makes, but things aren't terribly clear, and it's not obvious what all these buildings are. So there's not much information in this particular plate. My least favorite design is this one from Columbia County, in New York State, where I was brought up. And here these poor famous people in Columbia have bites taken out of them. And the names are kind of tipped. Overall, not a terribly successful design, although I treasure the plate because my father gave it to me, and it is Columbia County. So those are some of the blue plates that are of interest. Milton has two historic plates that were made before the one that I designed. The most beautiful one is this one for the 250th anniversary. It was designed for 1912's celebration. And they were so fortunate to be able to afford Wedgwood, English Wedgwood design. So it's a lovely color. The design is embedded under the glaze, and just really a beautiful plate. By 1962, Milton had another plate, and we cherish it because it represents Milton's tradition, but it's not a particularly interesting plate, I will have to say. It's the town seal with the dates around the outside. And for my money, I missed the blue. So what I wanted to do was to see if I couldn't design a plate that would have some of the historic scenes from Milton, had a better design, but yet carried on the blue plate tradition. Now, I early decided that what I was going to do was to use a circle divided into 8 sections. The next design, I wanted to get it into blue to get more of an idea of what was happening with the design, so I could see what the different sections were going to look like. If you compare this design with what actually happened, we can see that the pie-shaped pieces became much longer and that the center section became much smaller. And that allowed me more opportunity to get more of the buildings involved in the center. Another part of the design was given up, and that was my idea of having a blue section of flowers or leaves or some pattern that would divide the various sections. This proved to be totally unworkable and very confusing. So if we look at the final design over here, we can see that that was eliminated in favor of white, pure white sections. And thank goodness I gave this up. It was hard for me to give up that blue, but I did, because it would have been very confusing to have a pattern as busy as this separating out the various the drawings. How do we choose the images to go on the plate? I worked with Brian Doherty, and we decided we wanted to represent a number of aspects of life in Milton. We wanted to include history, and that ended up being the Suffolk Resolves House, where one of the first documents for the Revolutionary War was signed at this house called the Suffolk Resolves. It was done in 1774. We wanted to include the political history of Milton. So we included this church. This is First Parish Unitarian Church, where it's the site of one of the earliest town meetings. Then we wanted to include the beauty of Milton. So that, many different possible things there, but we chose the Milton Hill view out towards Boston, a beautiful view in Milton. We wanted to represent industry, so we chose the Walter Baker Chocolate Factory, which is partially in Dorchester and partially in Milton, and a very fantastic historical building with a long history of making very delicious chocolate. We wanted to include education, so we chose here the newest building in Milton, which is the Milton High School, and we have an old image of one of the oldest buildings in Milton, no longer standing, which was the founding of Milton Academy. We wanted to include service to Milton, and there we went to, I chose the Civil War Memorial. And I wanted to include more than people who have died in the service of their country. So I invented a phrase that I'm really very proud of. I love to say, I really like this phrase. And it is, in memory of Milton citizens who served their town and country in war and peace. So I wanted to enlarge the idea of service to include more than just the military. This is the Civil War monument that is near Town Hall. Then we have a museum, culture. This is the Captain Forbes House, so that helps to represent our culture. We're very proud of our Milton Library. So here's the Milton Public Library, established in 1870. The design element represented a problem for me because when I put this house in, the Forbes house, and I put the library in, that left two very odd spaces down here with nothing in them. So a couple of add-ons were one of our newest buildings. This is the Baron Hugo Lira gazebo, so I was able to get that in. That's a very new structure. And over here, what else was I going to put in this funny little corner? So I chose a horse trough, and it's a memorial to Henry Russell Sturgis, built in 1909. And so those things are just sort of like little add-ins to take care of that space, but they make the plate, I think, a little richer in its history. Now, how do we go about making this plate? First thing I did was to go off with my camera, the Pentax camera, and once we decided these were the images we wanted, I went out on a beautiful day and started taking photographs. So here are some of my photos. Here's the one of the church, the Unitarian Church. Here's the Forbes house. This is the Civil War monument, which appears up here. And here's the Milton High School. That's over here. So that helped me get some of my imagery together. Then I referred to a wonderful book, The History of Milton. And there are two incredible engravings in here by a man named Lacroix. One is this engraving of Milton Hill, the sea view from Milton Hill, it's called. And that was a source of this drawing. And then it also has a wonderful engraving of the Walter Baker Chocolate Factory, and that became the source for this drawing. So that was the source of the drawings. Okay, now next? What do we do next? Okay, now I figured out how we're going to get our material together. And next step, take a photograph. And for those of you wondering how to do it, this is your next step. You get your photos together, get your material you're going to be working with. And at this point, I used tracing paper. I put tracing paper down over the top and began working with a pen to make a tracing. So this photograph led to this tracing. Now, those of you who know about photography know there's a problem called parallax. In parallax, you'll notice that the lines of the building kind of slope up. That has to do with perspective. If you're looking kind of taking your photograph up, the building is going to be narrower and narrower at the top. So when I did my tracing, I had to continually correct the parallax and pull the lines out so it didn't look like the building was on a starvation diet up at the top or had gotten swollen at the bottom. It's very subtle, but it makes a huge difference in the design process. So each one of these buildings had to be drawn. Particularly difficult with the church. This Unitarian Parish Church was very difficult to straighten out the parallax and still have it be presentable. Organizing the plate is very complex. We have 8 segments here. How am I going to do it? We take the circle and divide it sort of like a pizza with a shape in the middle. So that's the basic concept. Now the next step is to try to decide what is going to go inside each one of these segments. And these little schematic drawings cut out, pasted down, indicate where I've decided I'm going to put the 8 primary, most important images. Then, the next step, to clarify it even further, a little bit more deliberately to make sure that I have things exactly where I want them to be. You will notice that the church originally was over here, and in the final version, much better, it goes down to the bottom where it forms an arrow pointing up at the eagle, which is the climax of the composition. All right, which building should go where? If this may be difficult for you to see, and maybe I can hold them up. or maybe we can just talk about it. In trying to plan how this thing would work aesthetically, I finally figured out, let's work with this. I think this will make more sense. The church is like a big wedge coming up. So it just seemed obvious that the church should be here, and then the eagle with its big, broad, spread wings up at the top clearly should be the symbol that surmounts the plate. So we go up here, and then we go out there. Then we needed to have two kind of parallel or flat horizon lines. Clearly, the sea and the building should go here. It's so obvious that the Forbes house and the library should be opposite each other. They have the same shape, so clearly they go there. A little more difficult here with the Suffolk Resolves and the two school buildings, but the picket fence, I think, carries you on through here. Now, the center. The center was very difficult to figure out. And I'm going to show you a few images, excuse me, that help design the center. I originally thought that we would have a 350 symbol in the middle. And I also thought that it would have a decoration around the outside. I really discarded this. And finally one day, I was thinking about it, what could I do, what could I do? I figured out that I was going to use the laurel wreath, a famous symbol from ancient Greece and Rome, as the centerpiece. And then I decided, yes, indeed, I really should use the town seal in the center and discard the number 350. So this is the final version as it appears in the plate. The laurel wreath is no longer in white, it's turned into black or a positive image, and the 350th symbol is embedded within that. I'd like to talk for a minute or two about the creative process that goes into making something like this. I was always good at drawing. I loved drawing when I was a child, and people recognized very early on that I could do it and excelled at it. It was one of my skill areas. I went to Smith College, where I worked with Leonard Baskin. Some of you may remember him. He was a meticulous craftsman and greatly interested in black and white drawing with a pen. We actually had to use a crow quill pen, and I've transferred over to a modern pen, which is much easier to use. But detail in drawing, specific feeling for vegetation, trees, rocks, textures, is very important in making a design like this. We're going to take the example of the Civil War Memorial Rock with the eagle on top as an example. This is the photograph that I took of that site. When you're faced with a photograph like this, it's just a place for getting started. We have to decide what to leave out. We're certainly not going to put in the truck. We're going to leave out the road. Far too much vegetation. We need to concentrate on the rock itself. So you'll notice in my drawing that the shape of the rock is generally the same as it is here. But how to depict the eagle? Here the eagle is just sort of a black shape. We need to delineate that in a way that will be intelligible when it's on the plate. The memorial wreath, I enlarged that much, much bigger. Wanted to make the ribbon very dramatic and large. And I certainly wanted to have the two American flags be very prominent and dominant. Then I've always loved drawing plants. So to get the feeling for hostas, what's the difference between a hostas and an azalea and a tree? And over here I incorporated a tree that it's a subtle touch, but I really enjoy this. This is a weeping willow, which in the 19th century was a symbol for grief, often used in memorial artwork for people who've died. One of the interesting things about the plate is that it's completely hand-drawn. I can't stress enough that it's not made by a computer. The only computer-generated images are the words, and I think that was a good move because I wanted the words to be very clear. So I'm just going to demonstrate for a minute here how I actually draw with this pen. It's a wonderful instrument. It's just a common pen that you can purchase at Staples. but it makes a nice line, and it's a non-fading line. And I found that I was able to draw clouds, put in a few little birds if I felt so inclined. I always love birds flying overhead, a little romantic touch here. Could add more cloud formations, shade in the clouds a little bit more, maybe make it a little bit more aggressive on the clouds. Down below, supposing we want more grass down here, we could add additional lines of grass, maybe a little hint of a daisy or something would be kind of fun. Little lines to indicate the horizontal nature of the grass up there at the Forbes house. So that's the drawing technique. It took me 4 months to draw the design for the plate, and one of the reasons was I had to continually modify my drawings, adding more imagery at the edge, particularly the skies, adding more foliage. Sometimes I would have to add another pine tree over here, you know, Douglas fir or whatever, in order to complete the design. So it was a constant addition of more lines, more textures, more sky, more clouds, whatever it took, so that the house itself would be sitting within this very peculiar shape. I want to say that it was a great privilege for me to be able to design this plate, and I was happy to donate my services and my design to the Town of Milton. If you have any interest in buying this plate, you can call me up personally. My telephone number is 617-698-6112. You can also purchase it by going to the Town of Milton Selectman's office. And I want to point out that all proceeds benefit a legacy gift for the Town of Milton as a remembrance of a wonderful 350th anniversary. Good enough? Okay.
I think it's great.
All right.